Hello, I'm Corey Newton. I'm talking more about why I wrote Constitutional Capitalism and Common Defense. This is going to focus on the common defense element. Grand strategy for the 21st century. Last week, we had ISIS cut off the head of a journalist. And if you're watching any of that coverage, you saw everybody in the media running around. The world is falling apart between what you had with the beheading and what you had in eastern Ukraine. What's the foreign policy of the United States? Why is the world falling apart? And the reason they ask that question is because the people in the media are not looking at the world through a strategic context. And the reason they are not looking at the world through a strategic context is because the two-party idiocracy who controls the entire country, every level of government, isn't looking at it through a strategic context either. Now, pop quiz. What is the grand strategy of the United States right now? What was the grand strategy of the United States 10 years ago? What was the grand strategy of the United States 15 years ago? Anybody? The reason you can't answer is because there was never a grand strategy of the United States right now, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. The last time you can find anything that passes for a poor excuse as a grand strategy was at the end of World War II and at the beginning of the Cold War. It was something they call containment. We're going to contain communism around the world, wherever it may occur, wherever it tries to spread. That was the last quasi-grand strategy the United States had. Before that, you have to go back to the Monroe Doctrine, which was, okay, we're in North America, we're the big boy on the block, we don't want any imperialism, we don't want any intervention from foreign powers in our Western Hemisphere. Before that, the only thing we have to go for as far as grand strategic advice and grand strategic formulation is Washington's farewell address of 1796. And that is something I draw on significantly for my theory of common defense. Now, what does Washington lay out? Washington was brilliant because he lays out ordering principles, which we'll get into in a minute. But the ordering principle of the United States is a hierarchic, centralized ordering principle through the Constitution. And the ordering principle of the international system is anarchic and decentralized. And you can say, all right, Corey, what are you saying? You want to get back to Washington's farewell address of 1796 for the sake of nostalgia? No. I'm saying we need to get back to that because it is right. And the reason we are able to know that is because there are contemporary materials that support such a thesis. The theory of structural realism by Kenneth Waltz basically echoes Washington's advice and admonitions. Now, the ordering principle Waltz sees is the same one as Washington, anarchy and decentralization. So one of the first things of structural realism, the worldview that I buy into, is anarchy is inherent in the international system. The second tenet of structural realism that I buy into is that states are the primary actors in the international system. And the third is that within a system of anarchy where the state is in control, it is in the rational interest of the state to seek security, survival, and independence. So now, common defense takes Washington's farewell address, uses Waltz to legitimize it, to say the world has not changed since 1796. Because the first thing you say, oh, Washington's farewell address, 1796, the world is much more dynamic, the world is much more complicated, much more complex. It's not. It's the same exact world. It's anarchy. And what we have done since World War II is try to impose hierarchy on anarchy. This is why you end up with containment, and you're fighting a domino theory war in Korea and Vietnam and Nicaragua, all over the world. That's why you're supporting Saddam Hussein. That's why you're flipping regimes, because containment got away from anarchy. There was going to be order, and with the neoliberal international economic world order promoted by the United States post-World War II, those kind of went hand in hand. And now we see today it's all falling apart because you cannot impose hierarchy on anarchy. And if you do, the world's sole superpower is now in a phase of unipolar overextension and decline, trying to enforce, prop up, and prolong this neoliberal economic order after World War II. It's not happening. Nobody's buying it. The Russians aren't buying it. The Chinese aren't buying it, the Indians aren't buying it, and the Brazilians aren't buying it. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about multipolar realignment. So let's get back, a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, we have Washington, we have Waltz and the structural realism. We also have independence and sovereignty. Now, what does the Constitution say about all this? That's the last check and balance. And that's what we're going to check and balance it against. So, multiple appendices, productions of military goods and services, provision of national defense, conduct of international relations, and foreign policy. And what I do is lay out a framework for us to disengage and disentangle ourselves from all these worldwide police actions, limited objective campaigns. And why? Because what should the common defense grand strategy of the United States be? It should be to maximize our political, our economic, and our military independence. That is why we were founded. That is why we fought against Great Britain, because you remember the 7 Years' War, it was a contest between Britain and France for North America. So Britain won, and guess who got to pick up the tab? The colonies got to pick up the tab. That's why they're dumping tea in Boston Harbor. That's why Sam Adams is dumping tea, tar and feathering people, and blowing up the Boston Massacre into something much more than that it was. That is why. So, this is what we do. We take the constitutionally authorized provisions for conducting foreign policy and international relations, providing military goods and services, and providing national defense, and put them into a framework. We balance them against the independence and sovereignty of the United States and Washington and Waltz. So that way we can engage in realism, structural realism, with the option to maintain our neutrality and to participate in real politics. You have all your guys, all your, your little two-party idiocracy guys trying to play tough. Oh, we need to keep all options on the table. We need to keep all options on the table. And every time they say that, it's because there's some kind of moral, ethical, or emotional dilemma that's calling for intervention. And when they say that, keep all options on the table, they are leaving out the most important option, which is the option of real politics. To pursue policies in the national interest of the country without regard to ethical, moral, or emotional considerations. And that's what we need to do. We need to be the hardcore realists, because what is happening is a multipolar realignment. I asked you to look at a map. This map is the United States Unified Combatant Command. So you got Northcom, Southcom, Africom, CENTCOM, everybody's familiar with, European Command, Pacific Command. So we're already looking at multipolar regional realignment. And what is that going to look like? It's going to look like the BRICS. Brazil is the economic, military, and political power of Southcom. South Africa, I mean, you could argue Egypt is playing a role, but they're in the CENTCOM, but this is all, fluctuating. India and China are the big boys in Pacific Command, while Russia's the big boy in European Command. Now, obviously, we have friends in all these areas, but strategically, speaking strategically and not morally, ethically, or emotionally, speaking strategically, these are the people we need to be dealing with. Okay? You have terrorism. Let's talk with the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the South Africans, and the Brazilians, and cut deals. Cut deals to kill everybody off, destroy our enemies and our will to fight, to have the mutual interests of the regional. Because you look at all these countries. Look what Russia and China have been doing recently. Energy and currency. All across the board is energy and currency. So this multipolar realignment is occurring economically, and it's also occurring politically and militarily. We have to deal with it. We cannot be in strategic denial. We have so many commitments. We have NATO commitments. We have commitments to Israel. We have commitments to Taiwan. Are we really going to go to war with China over Taiwan? Are we really going to go to war with the whole Middle East over Israel? Are we going to go with war to Russia over Estonia? Just like the President of the United States said the other day that, we're going to guarantee the independence of Estonia. How does that maximize the political, military, and economic independence of the United States? It does not. It doesn't do it. And why is it important that it does? Because you have all these economic considerations, you have all these political considerations, all the military considerations. This is really a flashpoint. So who do we have in South Cam? We're friends with Colombia. Okay, so we're going to deal with Brazil in terms of Colombia. Everything else that's going on regionally. You know, we have for Egypt and the UAE have been doing strikes in Libya to fill the vacuum, and everybody, a lot of these commentators are like, oh, well, this is what happens when the United States doesn't lead, and we lead from behind, and oh, the power vacuum, and we cannot control what happens. The more that we intervene in all these places, the more overextended we become, and we begin to decline, and it weakens us. So all I'm saying in here, we need to identify this multipolar regional realignment now and act on it before we don't have time to, and we have to do it from weakness. Now is the time to do it from strength instead of doing it later from weakness. We need to develop our energy resources, and we need to develop our currency to be strong, because this is all going to be regionalized. Russia and China are going to be trading everything in rubles and yuan instead of dollars. Okay, Russia isn't going to be taking dollars from Germany and UK and the rest of Europe to buy natural gas anymore. Brazil is going to develop their own currency based on their energy resources. So the days of the petrodollar and the days of the dollar, US dollar, as the world's reserve currency are limited. And are you going to blow everything up in our country to enforce that overseas? You can't. It doesn't make sense. And it's really not that bad if the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, as long as it occurs in a regional context where you have regional currencies. And there is no one currency anymore. So all the geopolitical, geostrategic stuff all takes place in an economic context. That's why constitutional capitalism and common defense go together. Okay, we can do all of this together. We can, and it's not, all the reactionary people are going to be like, oh, it's isolationism. Oh, it's protectionism. Oh, it's leading from behind. Well, these people can't think beyond phase one. You can be a strong, independent regional power who can defend its embassies and project force and wage a campaign of annihilation to destroy the enemy and his will to fight in 6 to 18 months. You don't need 10 years of spreading democracy, fighting a low to medium intensity counterinsurgency in nation building in third world countries. You don't need to do it if you have a grand strategy of maximizing your political, economic, and military independence. So you can think. You can think about that and say, oh, well, that's off the charts, but that's how it's happening. We cannot change that, because you had multipolarity from 1648 when a 30-year war ended. And everybody broke away from the Catholic Church, and now, okay, you're all independent sovereign states in this anarchic system. And then to the end of World War II, where the multipolar system, subsided, and now it's a bipolar system between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then we set up all these collective security agreements that could not exist without our material support. And then the Soviet Union passed, and you had unipolar world sole superpower moment for about 10 to 17 years. And now that moment's over. Now it's all realigning. Multipolar regional realignment is occurring. That's why you have hellfire in Ukraine. That's why the Middle East is on fire. That's why China's looking for islands that are in dispute with everybody. That's why you got all sorts of revolutions, because it's all anarchy. All the lines that were drawn in the Middle East from the breakup of the Ottoman Empire in 1918 are all breaking up. They're all breaking up along ethnic and sectarian lines. And there's nothing you can do about it. Unless your foreign policy and international relations are rooted in strategic principles, everything's going to be on fire. So what are the strategic principles that we need to be looking at? It needs to be the maximization of American independence and its political, economic, and military operations. And then we could talk about national security. Then we could talk about national defense. Until you do that, you're going to have chaos. And it's always going to be chaos, but it has to be looked at through a strategic lens. Otherwise, it cannot be managed. And you have everything that's out of control today.